Welcome back to Let's Talk Careers. I'm so excited to bring another incredible guest. Today we are meeting with Dr. Sam, who is a veterinary surgeon at Amity Veterinary Clinic here in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Welcome, Dr. Sam.
Thank you, Maria. Pleasure to be here.
Super excited for you to be here. We're going to be talking about all things veterinary science and working with animals and how you kind of got into that. But before we get into this part of the interview, I thought I want to take you back to before you were Dr. Sam, to when you were a young person still at secondary school and kind of dreaming up that future career. I know that wasn't too long ago, but if you could kind of remind us, did you always know that this is what you wanted to do?
For me, it was very easy, Maria. I have the benefit of having a father who's a vet. And I grew up in the north of England, just down the road from the very famous person that everybody will have heard of, whose pen name was James Herriot. And working on farms and with animals and in clinics was in my blood. And my earliest memories were going to farms with father and being in clinic with him. I think there was a light bulb moment which I will share with you, and it came as a bit of a revelation to my parents, because while I'd always thought that and assumed I'd become a vet, I don't think they really gave it much credence. But at the age of 13, I was at a school in the UK, quite a prestigious grammar school, and we used to have lunch in what was called Big School, where all the boys sat down, and twice, three times a week, the headmaster would come and have lunch with us, and he'd sit next to a boy and he'd discuss how they were getting on at school. Anyway, Philip Johnson, wonderful guy, he sat next to me one day and he said, Westhead, you thought about what you're going to do for your career? And I said, well, and I was a bit intimidated because I hadn't really thought about it. And I said, well, Mr. Johnson, I think I'd like to be a vet. And he ummed and ahed, and he looked at me very sagely. And he knew my father because Dad was the veterinary surgeon for his dog. He had a retriever. And he looked at me knowingly and nodded his head. And then after lunch beetled off. The next thing he did was get on the phone to my father and said, Roger, just had a chat with your boy. He wants to be a vet. I was met with something approaching the Spanish Inquisition when I arrived home. And my parents sat me down and said, right, what's this? And that was it. So from the age of 13, my career path was set. And it was not easy, I can tell you, but we can go into that later on. So that was it. There are lots of benefits that I had, Dad being a vet, not least that every holiday I could practice my hand at being a vet and work with animals. So there we are.
That's really interesting. You know, when we look at the theory of how young people choose a career, often family and parents are those strongest influencers. But hearing you tell the story, it almost sounds like your dad never would have really guessed that that's what you wanted to do. And that's very humbling to know, because as a career practitioner, sometimes we're concerned that parents really get too involved in making those choices. Would you say that you wanted to go down that path because your dad was doing that and he was your role model? Or was it that you saw what it was about and you thought, I can't imagine doing anything else?
Well, I'll share a secret with you. I mean, I think all of the above is true. I had one or two things in my favor, not least Dad's involvement in the profession. I was... how should we say, something of a prodigy at school and had a good brain. So I didn't have to worry too much about the grades. That was always going to be a factor. A part of it, and you may be surprised to hear this, but a part of it was laziness, because I didn't actually want to apply myself when it came to thinking about what I wanted to do. I didn't take the time to sit down and go to the careers libraries. Okay, after the age of 13, that was it. But if somebody had said to me, "What do you want to do?" Before this, I would have said, "Well, yes, I'd like to be a fireman or a soldier or fly airplanes." That's what children do. And I think I think in some ways it was an element of laziness, and having these things like father being a vet and the brain kind of laid me lazy in my choices, which kind of makes you wonder, well, if I had my time again, would I have done the same thing? That's really difficult. I don't know any other life, so I would find that very difficult. I mean, I've got things that I would love to have done. I think I've got a great deal of discipline. Before the interview, discussed with me about what I'd done at the weekend, and I'm passionate about sport and competitive triathlon. And I don't think I'd have been a competitive athlete, but I've got the discipline to have been pretty good in the military or the Air Force, and that was another career path that I was toying with the idea of. But yeah, so I think I was very lucky in that the decisions were easy for me to make.
Incredible. Now let's go into the academic interest. So you mentioned that grades were never an issue for you. So you had that really going for you. And I know that from what you've told me, you enjoyed mainly those sciences, but you were also really into languages, French and Latin. You liked geography and history and English. So it looks like you really enjoyed most of those subjects, but maths was your weakest subject. Now, when I think about students today, and when they aspire to go into medicine, whether it be human or animal, very often they're kind of weeded out if those science and maths grades aren't like super uber top. Would you say that maths could have been the challenge for you if you weren't good at all those other subjects? Or would you say to a student today who feels that maths isn't their best subject, that they really need to think differently about the study of veterinary science when they go off to university?
Well, that's a fascinating route to go down. I think the thing about, let's go specifically to maths. Yes, maths was not my strong point at school. I don't have a mathematical brain. And I had a slight disadvantage in that I did not like my maths teachers, and they didn't really like me. But not being the kind of person to sort of just give up on a subject, my parents and I realised that this was a weak point, and they set about getting me some extra maths coaching, and it really was. They got another light bulb moment, I think, in the year and a half before I took my O levels, as they were back in the day. I again, just it suddenly clicked, and all of a sudden, calculus and geometry. It was like, oh my goodness, now I understand it. So never ever give up. If you have a will to go and do something, then get some coaching. I mean, it saved my career, and it got me back on track. But with regard to the other subjects, yeah, I mean, biology, chemistry, physics are key subjects. You can't get away from that. Nowadays, most people are doing 4 A levels, so biology, chemistry, physics, and maths would be stock. But one of the things about veterinary medicine is that it's such an all-round subject. I would never say to somebody, focus on the sciences and disregard everything else. One of the key elements to being a vet is that you have to be an all-rounder. And this is why I loved my geography. I was fascinated by languages, partly because of the logic that is inherent in learning a language. And the funny thing is that one of my favorite subjects at school that wasn't science was actually Latin, because I adored just how logical a subject it was. It follows rules, and I love rules. I just went with that. The interesting thing was that my grandfather on my mother's side studied Latin and mathematics, as well as theology. He was a double first at Oxford and St Andrews. Maybe that's why I get the praise. But he always said that if you can do Latin, you can do maths, and vice versa. And so when I had my problems with maths, I said, right, if I can do Latin, I can do the maths. And so one followed them from the other. But be an all-rounder and never give up on a subject. Get some extra coaching would be my advice.
I really appreciate that you brought up two things. One was that relationship between you and your maths teachers, it's such a key component, because I do think sometimes it can become the barrier between a student feeling like they can do it and also a student feeling like, oh, I can't. If a teacher were watching this right now, what advice would you give them for a student that might be struggling in a subject after you've come through this, knowing that at some point you did get it? And, if you could get it, then your advice to a young person is not to give up. But what would your advice be to a teacher?
Well, I think, I mean, teachers are observant. They know just by observing students and looking at grades and so on who's dragging behind a little bit. And well, I suppose there's different ways of approaching it, but just to pull a student afterwards and get to know them, and not give up on them and say, look, you're struggling a bit here. Well, can I help you during classes? Would be it, and not to be intimidating to students. I mean, look, it was a very peculiar school I was at. We were called by our surnames, and goodness, it was in the days of corporal punishment. So we were fairly intimidated by our teachers. Some were good, and some were not so good. Interestingly, my sports master was somebody who did not like me, and I didn't like them. But I prevailed and got over that. But yeah, just to be observant of who's dropping behind and not intimidate them because they're flagging. And I suppose then, I don't know how it works with teachers now, but if they're able to approach parents and say, look, your child is dropping behind a bit, what about some private coaching? And if they're aware, even if they're a maths teacher and they know the child wants to go for something that's a little bit like veterinary medicine, that isn't immediately following on from maths, just to say, look, what about some extra coaching so that we can bring them up so they do get the grades that are necessary. So it's the personal touch. I think that's perhaps what I'm suggesting.
Whenever I work with young people they want to go to vet school, they're often asking me for work experience. And whenever I'm sitting down with them, we talk about what they could do, and they're always thinking of the obvious. Ms.V, I want to shadow a veterinary doctor. I want to kind of be in the clinic. Can you help me do that? And I'm always telling them that that's definitely something that we want them to do. But if they want to stand out at an interview, if they want to kind of really stand out when they're applying, and also for themselves to learn more, they should be thinking of different things alongside that. So what would you say that you do on the daily as a doctor that they probably didn't teach you at university, but you couldn't do your job without doing well today?
Oh, that's such a vast subject to discuss, Maria. um, they taught us how to fix things, okay, and how to recognize what needed fixing. What you've got to remember about veterinary medicine is that it is such a vast subject that they can only teach you so much about the nuts and the bolts. And I think this is where a certain personality becomes a vet and becomes a good vet, because they just kind of get it. And there's so many life skills involved in being a vet. And your point about, students just think, I want to be a vet because I want to fix animals. It's great. But I think my old man used to say that to be a good vet, you've got to have three things. You've got to be good with animals. Okay, you've got to like animals. You can't not like animals. Number two, sure, you've got to be good at the medicine and the surgery, that actual technical stuff. And then the third bit actually is even more important. You've got to be good with people, because if you're not a people person, you're not going to get anywhere. People trust us with some of the most precious elements of their lives. I mean, there must be children, pets, and then belongings, houses, cars, things like that. And so I think people or children and young people that are good with other people have got a good start. Okay. Now, I'll just go into my own experiences with this. And again, I was very, very lucky. I had family that was supportive. I've discussed my father, and I've discussed my mother's father, who's the double first at St Andrews in Oxford. The other important guy in my life was my father's father, who was the most socially adept person I've ever met in my life. He listened to people. He made comment. He was knowledgeable. He was fascinated by everything. If you discuss politics with him, he was interested. If you discuss the latest plastic model from Airfix, he was interested. He was also an amateur paleontologist and owned a cotton mill and was a scoutmaster. So the people in my life were important. I was lucky enough to have a job on a fruit market from the age of about 11 until I was 16, which brought me into direct contact with the general public. So I was not intimidated by fresh people, fresh faces, talking to people. And sort of as a lead on to that as well, I always say to people that are going into the profession, don't focus on being a vet. What got me into vet school, apart from the things that I was good at and had the fortune to have behind me, was that I was an all round. I was interested in sports. I was interested in the outdoors. I had a railway set as a young child. I collected stamps, and I can remember an interview when I went for an interview at the Royal Vet College in London. They kind of said, "Well, is there anything you don't do?" Not really. I'm interested in all sorts, and I think that's another point. A lot of wannabe veterinary students focus on going to work in a clinic or with vets. No, that's stuff you do when you're in final year or the last 2 years of your studies. If you want to be a vet, work with healthy animals. Go and work in the stables. Go and work in the dog kennels. Go and work some dog rescuers. Go and spend a few days in a grooming parlour. One of the keys about being a vet and a medic to a degree, or a car engineer, I mean, goodness, we're all the same. You've got to know what the normal is before you know what the abnormal is. So a little puppy came in this morning. This puppy, the owner said, "Oh, the dog's scratching lots." And I looked at it. I said, "That's completely normal. Puppies scratch. They're hypersensitive." And she was, "Oh, all right, that's fine." If you know what the normal is, then you can work out what's abnormal. So, in answer, they can't teach you everything. You have to learn a lot of stuff after you've graduated. But importantly, go in there as an all-rounder and get as much life experience as you can.
Thank you. That is definitely something for young people to really consider when they're going into that. Now, talk to us about your current role and what it's like to be part of a clinic like Amity.
Amity Vet Clinic. Well, I'll explain a little bit. Amity Vet Clinic is a moderately sized vet clinic in Dubai, which is filled with currently 55 to 60 clinics. We started up here about 3.5 years ago. I think it's 3.5 years. Time passes. As a brand new startup with a chap who had background in the corporate world, had made some money and wanted to look for a new venture. And he was passionate about and is passionate about the well-being of cats and stray cats and so on. And thought, okay, well, let's get into this. The clinic we have, I think at the last count, it was 6 vets. We're a mix of different nationalities. There's another Brit. We've got a lass from Croatia, 2 Egyptians, and an Indian. And we've got about 5 nursing staff and several members of reception staff and cleaning staff. And we pitch ourselves as kind of middle of the road. There are guys that are real specialty vets in Dubai and they've got history behind them. They've been here 20 or 30 years. And there are the new startup clinics who are just going in and doing the sort of beginnings. But our main aim is to do good quality veterinary medicine, which is both ethical and done with integrity. And I'm driving the sort of getting things done precisely and efficiently, but not charging the top dollar for it. So I think we've got a good niche there in Dubai. We're neither top nor bottom, but we do things very carefully and with great precision. So that's Amity Vet for you.
And what's it like to be working in a clinic as opposed to maybe some of your other experiences? So, for example, when you were talking about your dad having a farm, how is that different to being in a clinic and working on a farm?
There's not the freedom to get out and about, get fresh air. You're under pressure quite a lot of the time because there's always the scrutiny of the boss, other vets, staff, and clients coming through the door. As a cattle vet, which I was for the first 6 years of my life as a veterinary surgeon, you're out and about in the field, quite literally, on farmyards, and then you go from a surgery to a call, and you've got that time in the car to reflect, to think, to sort of be by yourself. Goodness, back in the old days, we didn't have any real communication. What I would have to do was finish a call, stop off at a local payphone, call the clinic. Are there any calls coming in? Oh yes, there's someone just around the corner from you, and that's how we communicated. And then of course we got pagers, so someone would page you and say, call the clinic back. And then, goodness, back in 1992, yeah, 92, I think it was, we got a mobile phone for the car. And that took some of my freedom away, which was never returned, of course, with the advent of mobile telephones. But being in the clinic, yeah, I mean, one of the exciting things, Maria, is that you never know what's going to come through the door. The old adage is common things are common. So we see an itchy dog, and it's going to be an allergy, or maybe it's got mites. But on the other hand, there are really strange cases that come through, and if you're prepared for something different and novel, and you look out for them, you'll find it. So being in the clinic, a little bit claustrophobic, but it's comforting in some ways. I know where everything is. I've got a bit more control over the way I lead my life and my professional life, and everything's here. So instead of being in the field and you've got a cow that suddenly goes down with something and you haven't got the drugs, everything I need is here. So
Would you say would you say that's something that a young person needs to think about, is how they work or what the type of environment? So, maybe a student might not want to be restricted to an office or a clinic, that they would be best suited working more in the open. Is that something that you would say they should start reflecting on before they become qualified and certified, or during that process?
I think it's a slightly different approach, I suggest, in that most cattle vets become cattle vets because they're passionate about cows, or shall we say farm vets or production animals. And the same with people that are interested in equine work. Equine work is slightly different because you could work in a hospital as opposed to out in the field. So I think if someone's wanting to be a cattle vet, by default, they're going to become somebody who's out and about. Equally, it would be very difficult for a small animal vet to be to want to live an outdoor life, because we can't do that. We're treating animals within the clinic. So it's a slightly different sort of way of looking at it. I think if you're a sort of claustrophobic kind of person, and you want to be a dog and a cat vet, well, maybe you should have a rethink. And if you like the wide open spaces, then could you do cattle work? So it's a slightly different approach I'd take. I mean, I've done the whole lot. I've worked as a cow vet, worked on equine in equine work, and so I'm fairly adapted in my approach. if you'd asked me 30 years ago, could I work in a clinic and not out on a farm? I'd say no, I wouldn't do that. But I've kind of got used to this, so I've worked my way through it.
So it sounds like being adaptable and being open to change is also an important component for a young person. Now, 32 years of working in this industry, aside from the mobile phone and the going from out in the nature to working in a clinic, how is artificial intelligence evolving your work, and what is it that young people considering this profession really need to think about in terms of technology and how it's changing how you do work?
Oh, every day there's some new piece of technology that comes up. I was doing we call it CPD, or continued professional development course, yesterday, and they were talking about some imaging technique for looking at tumors in dogs and cats' noses. Goodness, I mean, back in my day, we had X-rays, we had rhinoscopes, which are basically light tubes that are hard, and you put them up the nose, and we had this thing called a fluoroscopy unit at university, which is basically an X-ray which looks at live X-ray images as they move. But as I've sort of progressed through my profession, goodness gracious, I mean, in Dubai now, clinics have got MRI scanners, which are great for looking at soft tissue. We've got computed tomography, CT scanners, which are good for looking at bones. We've got endoscopes, the flexible tubes for looking into animals' stomachs and gut. Technology is just amazing. I mean, that's just the hardware. Then we've got the software, and we're using a piece of technology now called Signal PET, where we take an X-ray picture, the dog or several pictures. We look at it, we make an interpretation. But in the background, this gets sent off to some big, I don't know, supercomputer in America, and they run it through a set of algorithms. And this computer says, well, that doesn't look normal. The lungs are thickened and hard, and it will help us with the diagnosis. So artificial intelligence is certainly there, along with the technology to run it. I mean, another example is blood testing. My first boss, his wife was a laboratory technician, and she ran all these manual blood tests based on color changes. And nowadays we've got a machine which looks at different types of blood cell. It gives us a whole range of 40 or 50 different tests that we can do for blood chemistries and hormones. Goodness, I mean, you blink and it's gone. But that's why we do continued professional development to keep up to date with these things. So yeah, it's amazing. Run away.
Perfect. And I love that you said continuing professional development. So important. Students forget that a career isn't a final destination. There's constant upskill, there's constant learning and relearning. So I appreciate that you brought that up. I could go on and on and on and on, but I'm going to bring it to a wrap. You talk about camels in Saudi Arabia, chameleons and birds in Hong Kong, giraffes and tigers in the UK. You've seen it all, including my cat with half a face that's all scratched up. How do you deal with the humans behind these animals? Now, I've experienced what it's like to be the human with your furry patient, and I think that as the human, I think we're more annoying in the room than the actual patient that you're dealing with. So how do you have the patience to deal with the animal that can't express itself without scratching you or trying to gnaw at you, and the annoying human that just won't stop asking question after question?
Oh, believe we have bad days. We all have bad days. And on those days, I would love to have a clinic, Maria, where I would ask the client to sit out in their car and send their animal in with a little label around its neck saying, "I'm being sick." Okay. Now, there's a common fallacy that exists that we must be so clever and good at what we do because animals can't talk. Well, that's not strictly true. They tell us what's going on, and we've got diagnostic tests we can run, and we can usually work it out with a little bit of help from clients. But there are interesting ways of looking at it. I think, again, one of my first bosses always said to me, never forget that the person bringing a cat in for spaying, sterilization, that this for them is maybe once or twice in a lifetime. And never forget that they're going to be anxious and nervous. Put yourself in their shoes. So if I'm having a bad day and this person's annoying me, well, I'll finish up with a little funny story later on. But I put myself in their shoes, and I've got a dog myself, and I like to think, how would I want this vet to handle my dog? And I handle every animal as if it was my own, and that's the logo for our clinic, like our own. And I think that's really, really important that we do. We look at people's pets as we would our own. My little dog, I handle her in a certain way. I try my very best to handle other people's animals in a certain way. But, if I should tell you a secret within the profession, but if you really annoy a vet and you've got a cat, let's say, with a problem, the best way of annoying a client, quite professionally and legitimately, is to say, please, can you get me a urine sample from your dog or cat? And you give them a pot and you say, thank you very much, drop it off whenever you can. And they scratch their heads and I think, you've annoyed me, I'm not going to give you any help. And a savvy dog client will run around the outside the clinic, come back with a wet hand, but a urine sample. But a cat owner will come back a week later and say, I failed. And I look and I say, yeah, I know. Here's what you can do to get urine sample from your cat. We've got our techniques, believe me. And so don't annoy your vet because they'll ask you for a poo sample or a urine sample. And there are easy ways of doing that if you know how, and the vet is prepared to share that with you.
I love it. I love the humor
I get struck off for
that. I love the humor behind that. It's so important.
Sorry, that's another thing. Animals are funny. Even the saddest of occasions, you can see humor and light at the end of it. I think that's it. I think you've got to maybe doctors do the same. I don't know. I always find them rather humorless, but vets do have a sense of humor generally. So that's important. Never lose sight of fun and enjoyment and humor in the career you're going to go for.
So I'm just thinking then that a young person thinking of becoming a vet would have a lot to gain from stand-up comedy and maybe learning the art.
I've often thought I'm not the funniest person there, but I think look, if we had another hour, I could tell you some of the stories about things that happened to me. And at the time, nearly being attacked by a tiger, looking back, actually, yeah, that was quite funny. Seriously, it was quite scary, but looking back, it was full of humor. So stand-up comedy, definitely, and then that would get rid of any fear or inhibition about talking to people live as well.
Oh, and one last question, I promise you. So for a young person about to do an interview to go to veterinary school, what top tip do you have for them that would give them the confidence to know that at the interview, if you can remember maybe one or two things, this will help you to stand out? It's really competitive. It's a very competitive field to get into.
Again, I'll let you into a small secret. I was interviewed in London by a panel of three people. I did my research and I found out who was going to interview me, at least the lead interviewer. And he happened to be a fellow called Professor Vaughan, Les Vaughan, who was my father's professor of equine surgery. So I knew all about it, and lovely Welsh guy. And he leaned across and I think it's wonderful that one of the old boys is coming back to university to present his son. And so I had really had a rapport with Les Vaughan. But that was the point. It wasn't the nepotism or the fact that he knew my father. It was the fact that I knew who it was. And I greeted him and said, Professor Vaughan, pleased to meet you. And that actually was an interesting thing. I won't go into the story, but it got me through my final oral exam as well, because I knew who the interviewer was. I knew what he was going to ask me about. And the fact that I'd actually done the research to find, it's like any interview or job interview, you find out who the people are if you can. But be yourself. That's the other thing. These guys will know you're pulling the wool over their eyes, telling them something that they want to hear. Forget it. They'll see through. If you're passionate about being a vet, they'll realise that. They'll spot it. They'll draw you out on that passion.
Fantastic. And if anyone wants to find Amity Clinic, or if they want to reach out to you, where can we find you in Dubai?
Best thing to do is look us up on Facebook, Amity Veterinary Clinic. We're just on the other side of Hesse Street, up from the Civil Defence Station, which is up from the Saudi German Hospital. So dead easy to find, loads of parking, and do reach out. We'd be delighted to hear from you. Great.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Sam. I know I took more time than we thought we would, but hey, you're here. I had a lot of questions, and I'm sure there's a young person watching this being really appreciative. So thank you for being with me and for sharing your time. And that brings us right to the end of another incredible conversation. Today we spoke with Dr. Sam about all things veterinary science, being a veterinarian, his career journey, and some of his top tips. If you are thinking about becoming a veterinarian, remember, think outside the box. Don't just think about shadowing a doctor at a clinic. Everybody's doing that. Think about all those other soft skills, or maybe some of those tech skills that you might need when you do become a veterinarian. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all at our next Let's Talk Careers with Ms.V. Thank you.